So welcome everybody. So a couple of minutes to go, and we'll start right on 10 a.m. So if you've just jumped on, what you've been experiencing is our casual networking. We like to cover a lot of different territory, and we have broad interests, so we're always interested in what people are up to. And so feel free to put in the chat or respond when there are opportunities to respond. So what do we have in store for you today? Well, it's just about to tick over to 10 o'clock, so I'll get things going. So as Kelly mentioned, my name is George Havakis. I'm Managing Director of GISA International, and also the one of the founders, or the founder of the A-SPEC suite of specifications, and which we collaborate with all of the organizations that subscribe to it, and also are required to provide data in accordance with the specifications. So Kelly Ireland is our moderator for today. Kelly's been with us now for this is our third series of our online forums, and Kelly's been with all of them. So really appreciate it, and you know, a lot of the look and feel of these forums has come about from Kelly's advice to us, and also from our team, Kim, Hesse, and Natalie. And they will be popping on a bit later if they can. And also Gaby. So Gabrielle Van Wyk, some of you may know, Gaby is also a business partner of ours with an organisation called Digital Hive, and Gaby's session is all about tech, and he's going to give us some tech tips today. So every session has been a little bit different, so I haven't had a preview of what's on for today, so looking forward to seeing what you have in store for us, Gaby.
Good, George.
Okay, so there's basically 5 sessions to today, and we've just completed our networking, and this is our housekeeping. If you've got us on your mobile phone, no problem. The only thing that we ask is that if you need to take a call, please log out and then log back in, as sometimes we tend to experience the waiting music that comes on with certain phone carriers, and it doesn't disappear until you come back online. So just be mindful of that. At any time during today, feel free to put a question in the chat. The chat is being monitored, or if you put it into the Q&A, that's also being monitored. But I think for the sake of simplicity, we just want to use the chat today, Kelly. Yep, great. And what you'll see is that that there may be times when either Gaby or I are presenting, and there'll be a question pop up, and Kelly will bring that to our attention, so for us to address. Okay, so in this session, we're going to talk about the changes and clarifications, interpretations, requests that we've received from councils, water authorities, from consultants, and we'll present quite a large number of those. And then I've got a little session at the end about future proofing, to give you a sense of some of the analytics that are being undertaken, given that there's a large amount of data being collected about assets these days. So it's been our theme that we start off with governance, and it's a very high, it's very high on our agenda and very important. And really, it creates certainty. And that's the whole perspective around the governance side. So there'll be a number of elements to the governance, and I want to start off with certainty. And what you have in front of you is an extract of our asset and asset data handover checklist. Now, this was created about 18 months ago, and it's been, excuse me, and it's being distributed freely to anybody who'd like to use it. The intention is to include it as part of your project assessment phase so that you know what the deliverables are going to be. The way that we use it internally is that we ask consultants to complete this when they ask us to prepare A-SPEC compliant data for them. That way we know exactly what they expect, and then we can focus our attention on that rather than us guessing what's on the plans is needed. And I'll show, this is available on the website and I'll show you a bit later during the wrap up. But if you go onto the A-SPEC website and you type in proposed changes into the search box, it'll take you to that section, and then you can download it, and it's freely available to anybody. And one of the good things about it is that we've actually, I'll just go back a step. So at the very top, you can see that you can identify the kind of project, and then you can list what elements you need. And this gives you an aspect of not just looking at, say, A-SPEC or R-Spec, but what other assets may overlap in the areas that you're working in. And at the end of it, at the end of the document, there's an opportunity to sign off, so that if you send this, so as a consultant, if you prepare this and send it back to the council, they can sign off on it to confirm what the requirements are. The other thing that we've been doing, and this is now only about the second year that this has occurred, is that we've got documents that distinguish between existing and new assets. So the first thing that I want to do is reinforce that the two are aligned. What we mean by that is that whatever attributes or asset classes and attributes exist in one, they will exist in the other. So typically for existing asset specification, the kind of projects that may be undertaken could be audits in the field, or retrospective data capture, or backlog data capture, where you won't necessarily know all of the details that are required. But I'll show you the difference on the next slide.
This is the webinar.
Yeah, but this the R-Spec one, nothing to do with ADEC, but I'll calling them this QGS.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought you were looking at the.
We might have to mute that person. That might be Larry. Yes, so thank you for that. And so on the next slide, so the main difference is that each attribute we've categorized. So it is a core requirement. At the moment, we have an abbreviation YR, and after the last forum, there was a request to change that to RR, which was the majority agreed to that change, just to make it required and research. And then there's the optional field, and how that looks can be seen on here. So in this case, we've got a surface table, and you may be familiar with that. The reason that we'll talk about the area work ID in just a moment. But So when you go into the DDS version of R-Spec, then you'll see this table. When you go to the existing table, the only difference is that we've added an extra column and we've identified each against each attribute and classified it, whether it's an optional field, whether it's a required field that may need more research, or it's a core field. And essentially the core fields are ones that if you go out into the field, you can easily identify that information from being out in the field. And that's how we've categorized particular attributes to be core. We've covered this on all of the other specification forums, and I want to cover it again because it's come up quite a few times. And really, what I want to do here is present GIS's position. So there's often two variations that we see are being requested by the asset owners who are the subscribers to the specs. And one is for some assets not to be delivered, and then in other instances, processes that are different, that require some additional work to what is already identified in the specifications. So for the sake of consistency, our position is follow what's in the specification. If you're not clear about it, get some clarification either by contacting GISA through the A-SPEC website and filling in the contact form with your request, or contact the council and ask them what their key requirements are. If there's, I've had situations where I've had to moderate some of the conversations, which I'm more than happy to do, and feel free to bring me into the conversation if you need to. But essentially, we're looking at the consistency of interpretation, the consistency of delivery, and our suggestion and recommendation to the asset owners is that they post-process the data once they receive it. It's far easier for them to do that than for consultants to try to work out what each council's requirements are. Because at the end of the day, there is an impact, and the impact is on the consultants' workflows, their timelines, and their profitability. And one of the key benefits of adopting the A-SPEC specifications and processes is that the consultants know what needs to be delivered and the asset owners know what they will receive. We've also had situations where I've been asked, George, we've been asked to capture all the lighting, all the light poles as part of this subdivision. And it's a really good inquiry because A-SPEC is about assets owned by councils and water authorities at the moment. So if it's owned by that particular organisation, then capture the data. If it's a nice to have, our recommendation is not to do that. Because as soon as the data is captured, it becomes out of date and it creates uncertainty, and it impacts the confidence of the data in the GIS environment that data may sit. So our suggestion and recommendation is that the asset owner be in communication with the authority requesting a data access or sharing agreement. And that way there's certainty about the status of the data that is held in the asset owner's environment. And in fact, with web services these days, it's very, most organizations have the opportunity to receive web service feeds. So that way they can see what's current all the time. continuing on with data governance, one of the biggest conversations we have is about certainty of what's been built. And that is, what's been different, what's varied from the design. Now, we know that there are processes in place for the recording of those changes. But what we're seeing is a lot of that information is often not passed on, and in some instances, not recorded at all. So to put some data governance in place, what we're proposing is that deviations from design are noted. And as you can see in the example that I've got on the screen, the comments field is the critical one. So if it's been agreed to by the asset owner, then by all means put that there. And what should happen is that when this is provided with the data submission, that can be checked off against what the asset owner has actually agreed to. And the flow-on effect of that is that when the data is provided to the asset owner, they typically pass that on to the asset management team. And the asset management team, the only point of reference they have is the data that's been provided. They don't get access to the design drawings issued for construction. They don't get access to any of the other conversations that occur. So this is a really good opportunity for them to put some certainty into the data that's been provided is actually complete. Now, before I talk about this, you'll see a little profile picture of a head with some cogs in the head. When that comes up, that just signifies that there is a poll coming up. And so there's two questions here, and this is something that I created for this forum, Kelly. So there's two parts to the question, and the question is around the accuracy. We've been asked, what are the typical horizontal and vertical accuracies that are required here? Now, we've always, typically when this data is captured by engineering surveyors or other surveyors, we acknowledge that they understand about the kind of equipment that they use will determine the level of accuracy that they can get to. And so the higher accuracy levels need more sophisticated equipment. So it's about finding the right mix. So what we're endeavoring to do here is to say the typical levels of accuracy for horizontal is plus or minus 100 mil, and for reduced levels, or a vertical recording, plus or minus 30 mils. And when we talk about precision, it's to how many decimal places. The only exception to that is coordinates, where the specifications outline that coordinates are to 3 decimal places.
Excuse me, George. Can you just tell us what DDS is?
Yes. So, yeah, I just realised I forgot to outline that. So the DDS, to differentiate between the existing specification and the new specifications, we have dubbed the new specification, or the specifications for the new assets, as R-SpecDiscussion DDS version 3.0.6. So DDS is an abbreviation for Digital Data Specifications. So when I mention DDS from now on, it'll refer to that distinction versus the document, which is for the existing assets. Thanks, Kelly. Kelly, can you, if you haven't already, can you launch the first poll, please?
Just to confirm, George, the first poll is, if you do not agree, what do you propose?
No,
Do you agree with these principles? I don't know which one is
yes.
the first poll.
Do you agree with these principles?
Oh, thank you. That's now live.
Okay, thank you. And so essentially, it's a yes/no answer. And if you answer no, then we'll kick off the next poll. That you can then, it's free text. You can just put in what you would consider would be appropriate accuracy principles.
So we only had 16 responses so far, 23, and the majority is saying yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, so
85.
there's a few people that saying no, so that's no problem. So you can kick off the next poll as well, Kelly. So keep that poll live. Do you agree with these principles? And that way people can catch up if they then want to record their.
And so the other one is, if you do not agree, what do you propose?
Yes. So it may be, plus or minus 20 mil, or plus or minus 10 mil, or or it doesn't matter.
George, can you give more detail on the difference between DDS and existing?
I can. So the DDS is the digital data specifications for newly constructed assets. So if you're creating a subdivision development, then you'll use the DDS version. If you are doing some backlog data capture, then you will use the existing version, because the existing version is all about assets that are already in the ground, and therefore some of the attributes may not be able to be captured, and they're the ones that we have categorized as core attributes, ones that are required but need research, and ones that are optional. Whereas the DDS version it's a brand new asset. We know all the information because it's a brand new asset. So therefore you record that. There's nothing optional.
Does that answer your question, Brian? Feel free to take yourself off mute if you would like, so you can just ask questions directly.
Yep. So thank you for the people that are responding. And one of the things that we're also looking at is that, we've put in the typical accuracy principles. Now I noticed that it says there check asset class. So it may check or asset class. So it may be that depending on the asset class, there may be different accuracy principles. So it's a piece of work that we did in New Zealand a number of years ago. So there's a document that we've prepared, and I'll look at distributing that at the end of these forums, and to get comment on it, whether it becomes part of the A-SPEC overview document, which is an accompanying document to all the specifications. Right, I'll move on from there. I just want to talk very briefly about the GDA shift. There's a lot of conversation which many of you are probably participating in about whether it's a dynamic datum or you move to GDA 2020. From our perspective, it's all about recording the method and, in some instances, the parameters. So if you're going to record in GDA 2020, typically those three fields are the most important fields to record. Now, this is part of the certification form, which is also another document template that is available. and is to be provided with every submission. So GDA 2020, it's imperative that at least those 3 fields are populated. Now, there's additional details that are required for ATRF, such as the start and end date of the observations. So we've included these 2 fields to for people to complete, and as well as that, putting some notes into the field, into the notes comments field. So it may be the method that you've used, just some other information that will actually verify the process that you've used with your ATRF or even with your GDA 2020. So the main modification to this GDA recording is these 2 fields. So we've got another poll. Kelly, can you kick off the next poll, please? About whether people have actually submitted GDA 2020 or other, or ATRF. Thank you. And we've been, with all of our polls, we've been running them across each of the forums and taking a cumulative response so that we can get a sense of what it is. Makes it a bit easier to also collate the responses at the end of all the forums.
George, what is ATRF?
So ATRF, Australian Terrestrial Reference Framework. Sorry, I drew a blank then. I think that's correct, Gaby? Australian Terrestrial Reference Framework. If you go onto the ICSM website, and
George, I was muted and I said it twice, and yes, it is Australian Terrestrial Reference Framework. That's correct.
Yes, thanks, Gaby. Yeah, so when we put information about this, our reference point is ICSM, and the key thing is to make sure that we're not actually duplicating anything. We're just advocating that people go to ICSM and must be aware of. It's easier to record this kind of information if you know the principles behind it. Any other questions around that, Kelly, that you can see? Okay, great. All right, so
George, sorry, Brian Lugg has his hand up. Brian, did you want to unmute and just ask your question?
Yeah, George, we use GDA 94. So is that what you mean by ATRF 2014? I'm a bit confused.
No, ATRF is, sorry, I now see what your question is relating to. ATRF is the dynamic datum. GDA 94 is a static datum, as is GDA 2020. So most organisations are moving from GDA 94 to GDA 2020. And then one of the other proposals is for people, if they want to use a dynamic datum, they use ATRF. And the key, and because dynamic datum means that there's shifting occurring all the time, small amounts. So knowing the date that you started the capture and the date that you ended the capture will give people an indication of the kind of shift that they need to apply.
Yep. Cool. Thanks, George. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And George,
thanks.
Alvin has a question as well.
Okay, great.
Alvin, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Oh,
I think that might have been an error. Sorry about that.
it's okay.
Hey, no
Go,
problem.
George.
Yep. No, well, feel free to put your hand up if you do want to say anything. Okay, so this next this next section is all about the proposed changes. Now we showed them last year, so I'm reinforcing what we showed, and there are some changes which have occurred. So I'll endeavour to outline them to you, but really we're consolidating the changes that have been proposed so that you know what's going to come out at the end of these forums into the documents. And so I'm not going to show you every single change, but I'm going to show you some of the changes that have come about from conversations with the community. Yes, so that's what I'm going to do. Our plan is to publish at the beginning of 2023 calendar year. So at the end of this section, once we complete talking about attributes and code lists, and we'll run another poll about a phase-in time and your preference for a phase-in time, for the period for a phase-in time. The first thing I want to outline is across all of the specifications, we have a section at the back, section 6, which outlines every single change that we've made. So you can go there and see the specific changes. And as you can see, you know, number 3, for example, we've added backlinks connecting all attribute tables back to section 1.3. And during the wrap up, I'll show you what that looks like, because I haven't got that file up at the moment. But essentially, when you go to a table, you can click on this link and it'll take you back to the theme table if you want to start looking at other areas in the document. But section 6 is really key to all of the changes that have occurred in that specific document. Last year, we created a proposed changes document, and the intention of that was only to outline the changes. So at a glance, you could see where the changes are and what they are. So really, it took out, it was just an extract of the main document. So as per our process, we use yellow and blue highlights, and the yellow highlight is additions or some modifications, and the blue is what is to be removed. So this is what you can expect. So one of the questions that we have, Kelly, if you could kick off the next poll, is do you want to continue seeing the proposed changes document? That is just the cut down version, or do you prefer to see the full document? So if you answer yes, that means you don't want to see the cut down version. And if you answer no, it means you want to see the cut down version.
Go.
Josh, we're just getting some feedback coming through your area. If you could put yourself on mute, thank you very much. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next slide. There's quite a high level of maturity now with the use of the specifications, and so the feedback that we get, in some instances, it's really about removing ambiguity. So here's a good example of how we've updated some of the diagrams and their descriptions. So in this case, you can see that in the figure, in the caption below the diagram, we had previously lines representing pavement centre lines in Victoria. Well, we don't actually have pavement centre lines. What we do have is surface centre lines. So we've made those kinds of changes, and you can see them quite simply. To the best of our knowledge, it hasn't actually impacted the deliverable, because people get to the source of what that means pretty quickly, but now we've cleaned that up. And with the increasing number of users, we see an increase in requests, and they range based on the experience of the users. So the users may be just becoming familiar, or they're mature users. And so these next few slides are a cross section of the requests that come in, and we like to share these with you. Now, one of the things that we have discovered is that there's a lot of time and effort spent by asset owners adding the details that are held in the area of work extent boundary to each asset. And they do that spatially. So one of the issues becomes that when assets sit outside of the boundaries, then we get some ambiguity, particularly when there's a number of stages being developed concurrently. And so what this may look like is that we may have centre lines that go outside of the boundaries, but are actually being built as part of that yellow area, either a subdivision or project area. We'll just call it a project area boundary. So the key thing that we've done is we've added an attribute called the area work extent ID. And this is now being adopted as an attribute for all asset classes. So it will be held in the area work extent boundary. That will be its primary ID, and then that ID will be added to every other table. So it will remove the need to do any spatial interpretation to attach attributes using spatial queries. Last week when we were running A-SPEC, this question came up: can we move trees to A-SPEC? And I wanted to raise it in R-SPEC, and I know many of you probably attended last week, but for those that didn't, I'll just briefly go through it. So our position is that we know that trees are probably better suited to A-SPEC. So if we move them, then what happens to the trees that are required in R-SPEC? So we have this conundrum. So are we going to change for the sake of change? No. We'll change for the sake of practicality and pragmatism. And I'm about to bring up a topic that will discuss that a bit further. But our position at this point is that trees will not be moved to A-SPEC. We want to shift, we want to make it clear that it's incumbent upon the asset owner and the consultant delivering the assets and asset data. They're clear about what assets are required and where the detail of those assets